Hi, everyone, wherever you are. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. Today, we are joined by Fraser Edwards, who's the co-founder and CEO of Cheqd. I'm going to ask Fraser a bit later if that's how I pronounced it. I should have asked him before the show, but we'll get into that later. They also just launched their newest product, Creds, which is a cool name. Prior to Cheqd, he led digital identity pilot for the World Economic Forum and the Dutch and Canadian governments. Before we dive into all of this cool stuff, Fraser, talk about yourself and tell me if I pronounced Cheqd correctly.
Firstly, you did, and thanks for having us, and thanks for having me. So, yep, you're pronouncing it correctly. When we were creating the name, a few people came back with, is it Cheqd? And I'm like, no, but it was very few people, and we were like, oh, we'll be fine, it won't be a problem at all. And now it's like gaining traction. We're like, oh no, so many more people are using Cheqd than we thought would. So it's Cheqd, as in it has been checked, or we're leveraging off like checks for anyone who used to use those, knowing that if you have any Gen Z listeners, they won't even know what those things are if they're outside of the US. And then, yeah, I guess a little bit about myself. So obviously CEO and co-founder alongside Anchor, our CTO. We met while both working at Accenture on a mix of like biometrics, AI, blockchain, you name it. We bounced around emerging tech for a while. And specific to myself, like you say, led up a pilot with the World Economic Forum thing called the Known Traveller Digital Identity Pilot. So building self-sovereign decentralized ID for international travel, but also worked on a couple of central bank digital currency efforts between the Central Bank of Canada, Monetary Authority of Singapore, co-authoring patents there for cross-blockchain payments. So a bit of a jack of all trades between big program delivery and pretty niche technical architecture, which has been extremely handy for building what we're doing over at Cheqd and now Creds.
Fraser, I've got to ask you a question. Everyone knows Accenture, right? Why make the shift from Accenture into all this blockchain stuff? What was that thing that sort of inspired you to say, hey, this is interesting technology, I've got to look into it more, and then do what you did with the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, absolutely. So where it came from was I'd started my career in telephony data networks, so literally putting switches, firewalls like into racks and data centers. Started building a solution for biometrics, specifically trying to eliminate fraud and make the authentication journey a lot better for, say, high net worth individuals going into banks. And off the back of that, kind of took me down this identity path to some degree, but also the biometric side took me into an area of Accenture, which was all around emerging technology in general. And as like blockchain started to come through, and I think inside Accenture, 2015, 2016 was where it really started picking up speed of like, this is coming. We need to start adjusting businesses for this. Like, how do we build out solutions, all this kind of stuff. And I just, because my background was I'm an engineer by degree. My first projects with Accenture were networks, traditionally like distributed systems. Blockchain just made sense. Like the whole thing just made sense as a technology concept. So I found that fascinating, and we were building proof of concepts internal to Accenture. Myself and Anchor did some like hackathons where it was just turning out building like stuff on Ethereum when it was early and just seeing how it would turn out. And it was just, some combination of big distributed system, completely brand new technology, and also at the time, so much enthusiasm for something that was so new and groundbreaking that you get swept up in it just on its own. And yeah, it's led me all the way to here, so I can't complain at all.
Nice. That is an interesting story, and it makes total sense given your background. There's so much more I can ask, but I don't want to take up too much of your time today. So we have a lot to talk about, but I really want to talk about Creds first, because when I was researching you and I was researching Cheqd and I was researching Creds, I'm like, oh man, this is really interesting. And I could spoil the story. It always sounds best coming from a co-founder or a founder. Fill our audience in on what is Cheqd and what are Creds.
Yeah, absolutely. So where Cheqd came from is myself and Anchor had spent maybe 6 to 9 months taking self-sovereign decentralized ID and trying to take it into big companies and enterprise. And what's interesting is everyone has this view of companies and surveillance capitalism, but when you're speaking to employees of these people, they're still individuals and you can still engage with them on a one-to-one basis. Wouldn't it be better if it worked like this, or the data was owned by you and the experience looked like this? And what would happen pretty consistently was we'd have these amazing phone calls, we'd do proof of concepts, we'd deliver them and deliver user experiences. Everyone on both sides would be like, this is fantastic, this is the way that this should work in the future. And then be like, okay, what is the investment case to roll this out? And that's where it always fell down, because traditionally you've got these organizations who are building up this data, or they have it for other reasons, like maybe it's for security or regulatory reasons. And to give that data out to individuals and move it outside of their like periphery, they need to make an investment. Without being able to ever recoup that investment in the future, it's basically a non-starter. If you're in a big company, you've got a list of 5 to infinite things that you need to do. And it's all ranked based on our return on investment. And therefore, if there isn't any, it just shoots straight to the bottom of the list. And so after maybe, 6 to 9 months of myself and Anka going through that process, we're like, no one's solving this. No one at Accenture seems to be interested at solving this apart from maybe ourselves. Let's go off and do this. It's the classic like entrepreneurship story of we found a problem, no one was fixing it, and we decided we were going to go off and do it ourselves. So the whole focus on Cheqd is building out privacy-preserving payment and commercial infrastructure for credentials and self-sovereign ID and decentralized ID. And in the briefest terms, what that means is you as a user get to get your data back, you get that control, you get that ownership. And whenever that data is used in the future, whoever receives it pays back to maybe it's yourself and maybe it's whoever issued the data in the first place. And our thesis is that we're effectively solving the supply side on personal data by providing an incentive to release that data out to individuals. As a brief aside, like all of the self-sovereign decentralized ID messaging and marketing and terms are all geared towards individual people. The problem with that is they are not the ones with the data that is currently in these data silos. And therefore you need some messaging or marketing that lands with companies that says there is a good reason to adopt this paradigm, this technology, and it's not just giving user control back. There's this whole other commercial angle to this that you can achieve. So that was very much focused on Cheqd. And Creds came about from a completely different place, which was a surprise. So Cheqd is very much payments infrastructure, privacy-preserving payments infrastructure using our network. That is very low down the stack. Another, like an analogy would be, we are something like the MasterCard or the Visa or even the AWS to Amazon's like actual store. And so if you remove all the front-end parts, we're like way down the stack where no one theoretically should see us. And the problem with that is it becomes very difficult to explain what you're doing if no one can see what you're doing and it's way, way down. So Creds came out of initially building out just a demonstrator to show, look, this is what self-sovereign ID looks like. This is what decentralized ID looks like, credentials. This is how payment flows will work. This is what it looks like to own your own data. Wouldn't be magical if you could get this from anywhere. And it started off very much as a demonstrator, and it's grown legs in ways that we just never expected. So it's been beautiful. Like we thought it was just going to be like, oh, we'll just show it to people and it'll be fine. And instead, whenever we show it to people, they're like, oh, could I use it for this or like this or this use case? And it could be anything from, oh, I want to protect my community from fraudsters through to I want to issue carbon neutral certificates for projects who've offset themselves. And they're completely different. Another one that we had recently was like loyalty for a supermarket chain. And they're not things that we ever thought it would be useful for. And now we're in the very nice problem of starting to figure out which use cases and directions do we prioritize for something that was originally just like a token demo, which is always a great position to be in.
That's definitely a great position. And it sounds two really interesting use cases. And most of our listeners or viewers of the YouTube channel, they will know, like we've had quite a few decentralized identity solutions. And you've actually given us some real world examples, which is what I find really interesting. You're at that stage, right? And you talked about legs. And what's your inclination at the moment? What's your feeling? Are you still going to keep working on this? There's 4 months left of the year. Okay, it's too early to make a decision just yet. Are you going to decide something maybe in Q1 or Q2 next year? Again, whatever you're able to say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're going after it in a big way. The payment side of things is very much, one, it's crucial to make the whole market function. So from our perspective, we're solving like a market a fundamental market need to make the whole thing commercially viable. But that side of things is very much going to operate on a flywheel. So it's getting it started, and the more it spins up and drags people in. So as an example, if you're issuing data, you're going to start finding as many people who will consume that from you because profit. If you're on the receiving side, you're trying to get that data, and you maybe are doing it by scanning in PDFs or something, and we can get that data to you digitally, natively, and for cheaper. Therefore, you're going to find as many people as possible to issue that data for you. So effectively, this two-sided market that starts accelerating. The thing with that is obviously it takes time, and you need to build up that like velocity and momentum in the flywheel. At the same time, what we found with Creds is something that can help us really accelerate that flywheel up front, because it's going after, I guess, less highly regulated industries. It's going after like Web3 communities at the start, probably with a route to expanding onto different areas like gaming or loyalty or something afterwards. But the thing that we've found the most, and maybe why we're seeing the traction that we have, is it's very much designed to be as easy as possible. Historically, a lot of self-sovereign ID or decentralized ID solutions are quite technical. They're quite difficult to grasp and to even use as a developer. And to give a bit of an insight into how we're thinking about people issuing credentials, we want to make it as easy as if anyone who is listening has ever used like the Nike like shoe customizer tool, which is like you just hit some buttons and you change some colors and you see the whole thing change before your eyes. We want to make it that easy. You shouldn't need to know anything about schemas or decentralized identifiers or anything. It really should be as easy as just pick and choose the elements that you need and it all fits together. I guess your original question, going after it in a big way, because they really nicely symbiotically help each other, where Creds is going to be probably the thing that accelerates a lot of the flywheel as the more traditional industries pick it up.
That's interesting. An offshoot, right? And something that was just rumbling around my head as I've spoken to 100 and something founders over the last 2 years is you're in this new direction, right? And I know a lot of founders, they have this like loyalty and love for the original concept, right? And do you feel sad or upset about the fact that you're going into the Creds direction and possibly that Cheqd is going to be on the back burner for a while?
Oh, weirdly not the case at all. And what I mean is I'm not sad, but it's that actually we need all of Cheqd to be there for us to deliver on Creds. Because if we didn't have the infrastructure and we didn't have the payments infrastructure, we couldn't actually make Creds work in the way that we need it to. So I think the nicest thing is it's almost the best way I'd view it is Creds will probably be the best, and I'd assume first, but also the best implementation of Cheqd initially as it starts getting picked up by more traditional industries. So it's very much started off as I said, like that demo, but we found that because we have that capability to do privacy preserving payments infrastructure to actually make it a market, we suddenly have an edge that isn't available right now. So I wouldn't say it's taking a back burner. I'd more say that we've gone from building everything horizontally and at a low level in the background and realizing that actually we can show something off vertically that does everything end to end from a vertical use case perspective, and use that to massively show off what this could look like. I'd view it almost as the reverse of that AWS example I gave, which was like, obviously in AWS's example, they had the Amazon bookstore. They realized they had most of the year a ton of spare compute because they had to size up for Christmas, and therefore decided to start selling that off to create AWS. We almost came at it from the different perspective, which was we built all the infrastructure, and now it's a case of let's go off, let's show how powerful this is with an incredible user experience at the same time to wrap it all up together and show how powerful this is. I'd say like a bit of a new direction, but without kind of losing the focus on Cheqd either.
Nice. That's got to be wonderful. I know, again, going back to previous conversations, is sometimes, okay, this is the direction. It's not where we wanted to go, but we're going there, and it's going to be the direction of success, so why not? So I'm happy. I'm sure people who were like found Cheqd initially are like, okay, cool, like everything's working out.
Yeah, and I think to extend that as well, we found that it's like we're dog fooding our own infrastructure, and we're finding stuff outwards. Oh, we could do this, or this is the things that people care about because now we care about them as well. So it's been really fantastic to start focusing, and as we build this out, okay, actually we can get quicker feedback into the infrastructure layer than waiting for people on top of us to build and then giving us that feedback in, say, 3 months' time, because we can do it and get it inside, say, a month. And so suddenly the cycle on the infrastructure is way quicker as well. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is it's just allowed us to shorten down the feedback cycle, especially one of the biggest things for us is on the payment side of things. That whole capability is so new that no one's ever had the option of this before from an ID, self-sovereign ID, decentralized ID perspective. And if we were putting this into more traditional industries, which we are, but we were just waiting for feedback from there, then we could wait 6 to 12 months for the first round of feedback. And instead, by going off and doing Creds, we can get feedback probably inside a month on.
Nice.
But yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, like we have all this economic theory of who will pay whom for credentials. Practically, no one's ever done it before, so we don't know. And so in Creds, we're going to be able to really quickly figure out like who pays who, what, like how do you set up that market? Are the prices dynamic? Is there like a negotiation on what is paid? And what happens if you can get different attributes from different places? And we can get all of that in a very quick way and start actually, I can't wait for this, and hopefully our CFO does as well, but it's like start putting out papers which are like, here are how markets are forming around this type of data which hasn't historically existed. So this vertical approach gives us a lot of benefits that I think we'd have missed out originally.
So are there any like upcoming sort of data markets that users or people interested in Creds and Cheqd could be on the lookout for? Like you mentioned the papers, and is there something at some point that you're like, okay, this is going to happen in November and this will give us the data. So we'll start off 2024 with all this data and we can make a plan for Creds for 2024 based on this data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first will be, it's a bit of a trope, but reusable KYC. So we're working with one of our partners. I'd need to double check if I can name them, so I won't do it right now, but we're working actually with two. And the upshot is basically there will be reusable KYC credentials and we'll have the ability to start charging for that reuse. And now in a more traditional industry, that would obviously take a huge amount, like if you're looking at banking or like that kind of thing, it's going to take a long time for the regulations to come through. But in Web3 and underpinning Creds, we can start to see how that gets used. And for example, let's say I go through a KYC process and that data gets issued to me so that I can use it again. If I take that KYC data elsewhere, is it the verifier who pays the issuer because they issued that data to me in the first place? Or is the model I pay the issuer or it's given to me for free and then I get reimbursed whenever I use that data in the future? And so right now there's two kind of models or possibly a blend, and we don't know which one predominantly it would be and why. And this will give us a really quick feel for, okay, these are the things that people prize and therefore adjust our roadmap accordingly, because we just don't know yet. We've got all this theory and all of the partners that we have signed up are off the back of this theory. But until the rubber hits the road, it's all a bit of an unknown, which is going to be the fun part and where like papers and analytics and all this kind of stuff is going to come out of.
That does sound fun and exciting. And I think one of the big differentiators when I was looking into you and Cheqd and Creds, right? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, is, you know, a lot of the other decentralized identity projects are, I felt like, consumer projects, but I feel like you guys are the layer in between maybe Web3 and Web2 and consumers, and you're like an infrastructure layer almost. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah, I guess we've got a really like unusual or unique positioning in the market, which is we're very much infrastructure. So anyone can go off and use the payment infrastructure we're building out, and anyone can build on top and use decentralized identifiers. Our partners already are. At the same time, obviously, we've got kind of Creds going off in its own direction, doing very specific things, all to do initially around Web3 communities. And I think the other part of this is not just being decentralized ID infrastructure, but actually being payments infrastructure. And the reason I find that really interesting personally for me is if you look at how the SSI market is shaping up right now, it's very focused on being like a software as a service business kind of industry. So typically everyone is selling software as a service because that's the only way that they monetize. Whereas I like to think of it as that's the current state, and the future state will be once we start moving money around in tandem with data, we all shift to being fintechs. And that's a very different place to be, because we can start doing things like, if we're doing this in full Web3 crypto world, let's say I'm making the payment movements in stables, like whilst they're inside the system, I could put them into like yield bearing protocols where actually the revenue is being generated on the cash that's moving through the system, or the stables that are moving through the system, which is much more valuable and revenue generating than actually just the software as a service, if that makes sense. So it starts to suddenly have this completely different revenue model that really flips things on its head. And that's the bit that I'm excited about, because it's the bit that hasn't been possible so far. And I think it completely transforms the industry, because you can't do that right now. And suddenly it's, the analogy I'd use is a little bit like British Airways being a bank that happens to fly planes. Because if you look at their balance sheet, it's a huge amount of like currency hedges, risk hedges, all this kind of stuff. And actually, the planes are like a side business in the grand scheme of things, which is a strange thing to say. And I think this is almost going to go that direction of, yes, we're moving all this data around, but actually a huge amount of the value is going to be financial.
Okay, interesting. Fraser, you're on this podcast, right? And one of the things I always like to ask sometimes is, and especially for you, like you're coming off very passionate, very interested, very knowledgeable as well. And so to our audience, right, everyone's looking to expand communities. Like, what's your case for our audience to say, okay, we need to go and be involved in Cheqd or check it out? Like, people discover are going to meet you on Shorts, are going to meet you on TikTok as well. So why do you want people to go to cheqd.io, cheqd.io, and check you guys out?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say probably two things. Ultimately, the reason why we're doing all of this is to get data back into individuals' hands and under their control. So even though we speak a lot about incentives for companies to release that data, the reason for that is to release that data and give that back to individuals and build it up so that we can actually realize a decentralized or self-sovereign ID system. Because right now everything is set up so that just that data remains locked away. Everyone else is building SSI, but the two things aren't really gelling together. So I think one of the reasons for checking us out and getting involved in us is we are attempting to solve that market failure so that we can get data back out and experiences out to individuals. So that's all on the Cheqd side. If you shift this over to the Creds side, Creds is focused on, I guess, 2 or 3 different pillars. One of them is learning journeys. So being able to show you've built up some skill set or you attended certain things. Another one is on loyalty, again, driving kind of repeat engagement, bringing people back, building up rewards for genuinely interested community members. And so a good example of that is every founder I know has had a bad airdrop story in Web3 and crypto. Like every single one of them has had a bad one. And it's always because you have these hunters hunting around. And that's a prerogative, right? That's what they can do. But as the project, you're looking for people who care and who are going to engage and carry on engaging. And so for us, it's like, how do you build up that reputation of someone to know that they're genuine? And the only way is really repeat engagement and loyalty. And the final one is protection. So what I mean by that is there is such a colossal amount of fraud on Telegram, Discord, and other channels. You see these stories so frequently, especially with like fake exchanges approaching projects and asking for listing fees. And a lot of them are crude and a lot of them we joke about. But the reality is people fall for them. And therefore we need to actually guard against them. So there's all of that. So I think that there's 3 pillars. But I think if I wrapped up all of Creds into ultimately where it's going, is this idea of decentralized like reputational proof of personhood, especially now that we're starting to see like generative AI where you can fake someone's voice, you can fake their face, you can do it on video, you could do it live video if you've got enough computing power, and maybe you're doing it using avatars in the metaverse. Like, how do you prove that that is genuinely you interacting in that scenario where feasibly everything in there could have been generated by AI? And so we think that's going to be the direction this really heavily goes in, is not only am I dealing with a real person, but am I dealing with the right person for the right context? And do I have the right data points without also necessarily exposing too much data about yourself whilst doing it? So I'd say there's 2 different missions. There's the let's get people's data back out to them So we're not in this like dystopian world where Facebook knows more about you than you do. And the second part is, can I interact with other people in whatever context and trust them based on proper solid trust like data that's verifiable, but do so in a seamless way that I don't have to go through clunky systems to make it through, as well as also the kind of gamification of learning journey. So I'd say those are the two reasons, very different, but I'd say those are the two reasons to go and check us out.
Nice. Cool. And you mentioned a lot of interesting things. And I guess we have to talk about this because that was in the news. And that's also what brings the heat to videos these days, right? WorldCoin, Sam Altman, OpenAI, you did mention generative AI as well. Some people might be listening to this or watching the video and saying, hey, this is similar, right? Like decentralized identity, proof of personhood. And what's your take on all of that? Is WorldCoin going to be a thing? Or are you guys just going to replace WorldCoin and say sayonara?
Oh, I'd love to say yes to the second one. Screw it, I'm going to say yes to the second one. It's happening. I think ultimately there's so many different parts of this with WorldCoin that it's hard to focus on one problem because there are so many. And that's not to say that they haven't done some good stuff. Conceptually, the way that they've architected the system is quite similar to India's Aadhaar, where Indian citizens have a number that they can use to access services, which is somewhat based on their biometrics. And it's led to a huge uptick on just digital banking for everyone, regardless of who you are. But at the same time, like there's some pretty, like if you look at WorldCoin's view on like building this global biometric database of people, that's one dystopian thing which I find terrifying, because there's so many times where someone's built a biometric database, it's gone into the wrong hands and everything's gone wrong. The example, I was speaking to Jamie Burke from Outlier Ventures on Friday on a Twitter space. He gave the example of the Dutch database that got picked up by the Nazis in World War II and was used to basically exterminate the Jews. But a more recent version is Rohingyas who are leaving or fleeing Myanmar, I think to Bangladesh. So the UNHCR was using biometrics to allocate rations to individual people and doing so fairly. That database got handed over to the Bangladeshi government, who then just handed it over for some reason to the Burmese government, who was run by the junta.
No.
And now they had a perfect list of all of the people that if you matched onto it, you knew exactly their ethnicity. And then if you look at like the WorldCoin database now, like obviously it's much bigger, it's much broader, but based on where they've been pulling this data from, anyone who's early in this process or is currently in that database is likely to be from the global south or a developing country. And so you can start to profile people. And as soon as you start being able to make any links to it, that's where this all starts breaking down, where let's say someone is using WorldCoin, but someone's attached a load of information to that record. If you ever spot that person in any scenario, you know way more about them than you ever should do. But I think ultimately what they're aiming for is that global database. I think in the context of like proof of personhood, and also maybe something to do with, is it a real person or is it AI? But I think the bit that's maybe disingenuous, or at least I think it is, the universal basic income side. I don't think that's a real narrative. I think what that is, they know they want to build this database. They know they need to entice people to give over their biometrics for something, and they don't want to do it for hard cash, so fiat. So they basically have created WorldCoin to incentivize people to provide their biometrics without having to do it with like US dollars, which is ultimately what they've received their funding in. So I think that's where that narrative has come from, is this is a cheap way for us to incentivize people to give us data, especially in countries where like they maybe don't have privacy regulations. There isn't that understanding of what some of this data is because they just don't interact with systems like these all the time. And so it's an easy thing to be like, oh, it's free money and we're just going to give you it and give us your data. And then I think the final one that's worth calling out was, I think it was last week, someone pointed out on the WorldCoin app, it's pretty basic at the moment and it's secured by PIN. So once you've registered, you could just give your device to someone and your PIN, and now that person from their viewpoint is you. And so even the proof of personhood starts to break down, because actually it's not it hasn't been built with those kind of things in mind. And that's where I'm quite lucky with my background on the Known Traveller project and some Borders work, where you really start to see how complicated a system has to be to fit all these things together so that it's really difficult to game. So I realize that's a bit of a rant. I think there's elements that they're doing well, but I still find the whole concept just pretty dystopian. And what I would hope is the way that we're going with something like Creds, which is get signals from as many different places as possible that you're a unique human that can still express yourself with different identities depending on how you're interacting. So there's like work Fraser and weekend Fraser and climbing Fraser and cycling Fraser and online Fraser. And they aren't tied together unless I want them to be. That needs to be possible. And that's the way that we're architecting is you should have that freedom. And then someone else should have the ability to say, is this the right person at the same time? Which is challenging, but that's what we're aiming for.
Nice. And it's not a rant at all. And I think very valuable, very pointed. And I know I've taken a few questions from the audience on Telegram. Hey, what do you think about this? So it's nice having someone else jump in there and give their opinion. Fraser, I know it is middle of the day for you. I don't want to keep you back to back in terms of meetings. So before we end off today's podcast, is there anything else you want to say? It doesn't have to be about Cheqd or Creds. Anything that you were supposed to say that you haven't said just yet? The floor is yours. It's evening for me, so I have unlimited time. Yeah. Whatever you want to end up today's podcast, it's yours.
Fantastic. I guess firstly, thanks for your time. Great questions. And it's been really nice to do this in just a freewheeling way and see where it ended up. Firstly, yeah, thank you. I think the bit that I would be shot for by my marketing manager if I didn't say it is please head to creds.xyz. It's open for anyone who wants to start going in, diving in. And over the coming weeks, we're going to be opening up an issuer portal. What that means is anyone can basically just pick this up, start issuing credentials for whatever they want. The idea is it needs to be as easy as possible. So if you're on either side of those, if you just want to start collecting credentials, if you want to start building up your reputation, but also if you want to issue credentials for your community, if you want to protect them, kind of engage them, reward them, or possibly it's the reusable KYC side or credit scoring, that kind of thing, please get in touch. On one side, creds.xyz. On the other side, hit us up at partnerships@Cheqd. So that's CHEQD.io. And thanks again for having us.
It's my pleasure. I love so many founders are moving into this sort of easy, accessible space, easy user X, making things easy. And I think that's awesome because I think crypto's not going anywhere. The terminology might disappear, which is totally fine with me. And people like yourself and the Cheqd and the Creds team, what you guys are doing, I'm so happy for. Thank you so much, Fraser. I'm not going to babble on anymore. And hopefully we can talk next year, 2024, if you have time. I might actually be in England then, actually, and hopefully we can even do a live episode. That would be even better.
That would be awesome. I'd be so up for that.
I'll bring my equipment and all this extra lighting, and we can do a live episode. So I appreciate it. Everyone, please check out Fraser, check out his Twitter, his LinkedIn, check out Creds, and check out Cheqd. If you have any questions, you can contact them. If you're feeling shy, you guys know you can contact me. I can pass them on as well. And then hopefully we'll talk to them next year.
Yeah, thanks again. Looking forward to it. All the best.
You too.